Hey, welcome to Defender Fridays. So stoked to see a lot of friendly faces and folks that I know tend to join us here every week. Love to see you guys coming back week after week. And so we do our best to bring on the best defensive minded folks that have extensive experience in the industry that can share their war stories and their perspectives and their expertise to kind of just generally help us all level up a little bit. I was just talking to Justin in the pre-show banter. He's like, "Hey, I love that you guys put these on. It's always good stuff to hear." I said, the funny thing about it is I put these on just as much for myself as I do for the audience here because I don't get to play with all these things every day, right? So I love bringing on folks like Jaime who have specific, expertise that like I don't get to play with all the time. He's going to talk about some really cool topics like SaaS attack surface visibility and that kind of thing. And that's just not something I do in my day-to-day basis. So I'm hoping that there's other folks here on the call that might appreciate getting some insights from him. I've known Jaime a long time. Back in I was running a SOC for a state agency many years ago, and I was a huge fan of Alien Vault's Open Threat Exchange, which I imagine most of you probably know about. It's been around for a long time. OTX was like taking threat intelligence and the ease of accessibility of something like Facebook and bringing those two things together. It became like almost like a social network of sharing threat intelligence. It was the coolest freaking concept ever. And it was free. And they had APIs and all kinds of things. So you could, enrich your data based on OTX feeds pretty automatically, set up your own feeds. And it was just incredible. And Jaime was one of the key founding members and developers of the Open Threat Exchange, which is how I kind of came to know him. He's done many awesome things since then. Currently, he's one of the co-founders as well as the CTO of a company called Nudge Security, which focuses specifically in SaaS security. So Jaime, super stoked to have you on today. It's great to see you. And man, I'll hand it over to you and hear a little bit about what you've got in mind.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. And I listen to this from time to time, and you guys have great content. So I was thrilled to join. So as you said, I come from the threat detection, threat intelligence space, right? I spent most of my career focused on building threat intelligence teams, scaling threat detection, threat engineering capabilities. I was at a company called Alien Vault, one of the first employees there, helped build most of the products and then, focus on threat intel. As Eric said, we built OTX, that was that, open threat exchange, kind of like crowdsourced threat intelligence early on when, I feel like nowadays it's more common, but early on I could share a lot of stories about, how people didn't like that much. And because it was a lot of like small circles where people didn't like to share as much outside of that. But the fact was like there was so much open source intelligence already out there, right? Like people were putting blogs, they were tweeting about things, but there was no centralized place to actually collect all that, clean false positive, make sense of it, add metadata, and then being able to consume that in different products or open source tools, right? So we built that. Then we got acquired by AT&T, right? I spent a few years there, and then I was like, well, what's next, right? And we were thinking about what's the biggest problem right now that we feel it's not getting solved, right? And a lot of experience that we have even at AT&T being one of the, I can tell you one of the most well-defense organizations on earth. They still had this issue between how much you control access to SaaS applications and how much your employees can be actually successful doing what they have to do, right? And they were kind of like in the, you can't do anything unless we approve it, right? And I truly believe that that's a mistake for many organizations because, as we have seen, technology moves really fast, and you need to find ways to, bring technology to the organization and allow people to actually bring those tools early on in a secure way, but giving them those tools. So, we thought about that problem. The first thing when we talked to CISOs and, IT and security teams was like, well, what are you talking about? I don't even know what SaaS applications people are using in my organization. So that was phase one, which is, how do we actually tell people what SaaS applications are in the environment, who is using them, what security features there are, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I can go, I don't want to talk about the company, right? I would love to talk about the problem, but that's at a high level what we're trying to solve, right? How do we solve that visibility problem, control problem, but working with your employees? So this is not about, going against your employees, but your employees helping you do the right thing when they're bringing up these tools in the environment.
So it's trying to resist the temptation of saying, well, we don't understand the problem, or we don't understand how to approach the problem. So maybe what we should do is start blocking those SaaS applications, because if they can't use it, then we don't have to worry about it. But it's like, okay, but that only works in certain situations. You don't think your employee goes off the network and then connects to their Dropbox anytime that they need to, because that's where their data is? Like, yeah, I agree that I think having a better understanding, and that's true across the board, right? Like, all of these decisions should be made with information, not out of just a knee-jerk reaction to a fear, right? So I love that.
Yeah. And, the other observation is like existing technology, it's not very well suited. Existing controls are not very well suited for this new world, right? Where I feel like we have done a lot of progress on the cloud, side of things, but SaaS is still that black hole where, no matter how large the organization is, when we get in there, like, we give them so much that they're like, oh my gosh, I just can't believe we were not aware of everything that is going on, right? And they have network controls, they have endpoint controls, but there is just like so much that is happening. The other area is really is not just about the SaaS applications that are introduced in the environment, but the connections between them, right? And we have seen this with, Azure recently, right? Where, those OAuth applications are, a nightmare, and understanding all that. And now you multiply that problem by hundreds of different SaaS providers, right? You have GitHub, Slack, Zoom, Google, like, all of those things connect together. And, it's a huge issue, right? Because that connectivity is usually a problem because the visibility is not clear. There is no network visibility, right? That's like SaaS to SaaS communication. So how do you actually gain access to that? And it's a huge problem. Yeah.
It gets even worse, right? Because we're accustomed to the traditional legacy infrastructure environments where, oh, we'll just put a log shipper on it, right? And we'll be able to scoop up all the logs, send them to the SIEM, and we'll write our own detections, and we'll be fine. You don't have access to the underlying infrastructure of a SaaS application, right? So there's no log shipper. Now, fortunately, most of these, I would say probably all reputable ones, expose some sort of logging API, right? So we can tap into that and get into that. But there's new problems though that come with that. And I know that anybody here that's worked with Azure logging, right? You know that, like, there's some interesting nuances about that. Like, for instance, potential up to 24-hour delays for some telemetry items that you would expect to have right away. And that's just the cost of doing business. It's just kind of the world that we're living in now. But
well, not only that, but also, like, if you look at SaaS provider, tons of them charge you. You have to have an enterprise license to access a lot of those logs, right? And thankfully, we have Midnight Blizzard that gave, did a favor for the whole industry, where they were the ones that really pushed Microsoft to change that and actually allow access to those logs in the lower tiers. I actually wanna mention that Google is in the same situation, so we actually need to pressure Google to do the same, because if you look at the same exact logs that Google has for API access logs from OAuth clients, you have to be an enterprise customer. So it's exactly the same situation. So what's gonna happen is we're gonna have a new Microsoft, similar issue as happened with the DOJ at Microsoft with a Google customer, and they're gonna have to change their mind, right? Because again, most of our customers don't pay that enterprise license, and if something happens, they don't have access to that log data that is gonna be super critical for them to understand what the threat actor did in the environment.
Really brings up an interesting dilemma, right? Because, like, I think we've all kind of rallied around, like, the SSO tax, and how, single sign-on should be a basic feature of any SaaS application. It should not be an add-on or an upcharge. But I mean, the exact same thing can be said about visibility and logging. That should not be a premium offering. That should not be an add-on. It should be part of the platform, because one of the benefits, right, of outsourcing workload to SaaS, to cloud, is that you're able to transfer that overhead to someone else, right? Like, I don't want to have to maintain infrastructure and stuff like that. Okay, great, but I shouldn't give up the visibility of defending my stuff. I mean, because unless you're going to do it for me, right? Like, that's the trade-off. If Google or Amazon's telling me, don't worry, we will respond to anything that happens in your environment, I'm like, okay, fine, keep the logs then, we're good. Like, but no, the onus is still on me to monitor and defend and respond to issues in this environment. I must have the visibility that should just be part of the equation, right? So yeah, I would love to see some evolution there, and some new refreshed thinking about what should just be part of a basic tier of a platform.
Yeah.
So Jaime, how do
it even gets crazier than that, right? We have seen tons of vendors that actually lock down basic features settings that will prevent attackers from actually doing things in the environment on the enterprise tier. An example is like, you need approval, you need admin approval to install applications in the tenant. That's only available on the enterprise environment. It's like, come on, really? Like, like, it's like just basic security controls that should be available to any customer out there, right?
So what kind of thing do you advise then? So if you've got an organization that's using one of these cloud platforms that's withholding some of these audit logs and things to higher tiers, I mean, how do they still start to get their arms around visibility into these tenants? I mean, does it require additional products and things like that to bolt onto it?
Yeah, so the problem is not just that, like, the problem is still that the vast majority of SaaS applications don't have any logging capabilities via an API, right? That's the vast majority of them. Only like the more enterprisey ones are the ones. One of the things we do is like we actually use other signals in the environment to provide some like kind of like equivalent of logging when those platforms don't have those capabilities. And that's not going to be everything, but you can do things like password resets, MFA enable, disable, things like that do give you some level of visibility. But then it's up to we see a lot of security reviews where when people are evaluating vendors, they have these requirements, right? Where I'm going to choose a vendor based on the fact that they support SSO. They are not charging me for SSO. They have API logging. They have basic. So that's I see that more and more on the customer base where they are actually requesting that before they bring a platform on board. But yeah, I mean, I think the other side of the story is sorry, I lost the train of thought, but yeah, I was gonna say something else and then
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's almost like I feel like there'd be a benefit of some sort of SaaS buyer's guide, which is not sponsored by some vendor, right? Like, that's the trick, is that it can't be sponsored, or it's just going to be tilted towards one particular vendor. There's some sort of like checklist of things, because I don't know that everyone thinks about these things until they're 2, 3, 6 months down the road, and then they realize, wait a minute. What do you mean we don't get visibility? What do you mean we don't have logs? What do you mean SSO and OAuth and things like this are not charged, right? You got to have some sort of like navigation for this.
Yeah. I think the other challenge that we see is, for the 10 larger SaaS providers, right, that like the IT and security teams have visibility into, like the Salesforce, the Google, the Twilios, the Atlassians. That's usually okay. But then, you have this long tail of hundreds of such vendors that are in use in the environment in some capacity. And the challenge that we see is like, one, people don't know about them, but also IT and security teams don't even have ownership of those applications, right? And that's the key issue, because even if they have logging capabilities, like they wouldn't even know about it, right? So then we also see crazy things like you need to look at tenancy, right? Like we see, yeah, you may have a Dropbox enterprise tenant, but then people are using other tenants that they create, right? So like there is so much subtlety in terms of like that level of visibility. The other things we see is like vendors that don't enforce, even if you have SSO enabled, at the domain level, they allow other people to create other tenants, or they even allow people to bypass SSO and use username and password. So there is a lot of things and a lot of risk that is, you know, that can be observed when bringing these SaaS providers. It's yeah, it's a new environment for many people. Like, they don't understand all these subtleties.
It is. And I also want to be clear, like, while I think we're spending a lot of time focusing on some of the headaches associated with moving into the cloud, going to hybrid environments, using SaaS applications, I think we can all generally agree this doesn't mean that it's the wrong idea. It doesn't mean it's the wrong move to be transferring this, because at the end of the day, I still think that a lot of these, especially the bigger SaaS providers, right? Like Slack, if you follow any of like Slack's security team's outputs, like they've got stuff figured out. Like they're doing some pretty cutting edge stuff there in detection and response. And so it's like, okay, reasonably, I do trust that Slack's going to be able to handle a security issue that happens on their platform fairly well. But like what they're not looking for is they're not looking for authorized or unauthorized access to my instance, right? They're securing their own infrastructure. But at the end of the day, though, the argument between, well, if it's on-prem, we can defend it better. Okay, sure. Ask, customers of Screen Connect, right? They were actually the ones that were most susceptible to this attack because they couldn't patch it in time. However, the cloud-hosted instances were patched as soon as the patch was available, right? And so it's like, there's pros and cons, right? The vendor's going to be able to move faster at remedying vulnerabilities and handling issues than your on-prem traditional kind of infrastructure. So, I mean, I think generally the move makes sense for enterprises to adopt SaaS, but do it, with the information that you need. Like, how do we transition our monitoring model from collecting on-prem, logs from our own systems to, tapping into whatever, faucet is available to me in this SaaS application, and it just varies so widely. There's no black and white sort of answer to that problem.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. I still fight that fight from time to time when people are telling me they don't want to use Office 365, right? They're running their own email server. I'm like, well,
Jeez.
I don't have to tell you, but 100% you have had an issue with that. Like,
yeah, I should have used that example instead of Screen Connect. Exchange, on-prem Exchange is a no-win battle, right? Like, that is, even Microsoft has kind of started to distance themselves from it and just say, folks, there's nothing more we can do to stop this problem. Like, there are unpatchable, vulnerabilities in this Exchange Online. Just get to O365, which of course, sure, they'd be motivated to get you to O365 for money reasons, but it does boil down to, let somebody else manage the movement of emails, right? Like, this is not a critical function that we have to have in-house. It's less attack surface for us here, but just know that it does translate into different attack surface up there, right? So Jaime, that's actually a good question I've got for you is, what are you seeing as some of maybe the top one or two less than obvious attack surfaces of organizations that have moved to the cloud? What are the things that most folks are not thinking about? That distant area over here that, like, nobody's looking at, nobody's watching, but threat actors are starting to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think, few things. What we have seen, obviously, when you are using SaaS providers, right, that chain becomes critical. And we have seen in the last few years so many of those issues with, Circle CI and Jam Cloud and Twilio and Cloudflare and Okta multiple times. It's just, you are exposed to that at that supply chain those supply chain breaches, and you need to be ready to one, find that out as quickly as possible, and then have an incident response plan when that happens, right? And it's doable, but it's a new thing that people are not used to, right? I think the second one is, I really think that, Lapsus and Midnight Blizzard and Lazarus, they are teaching us a lot of lessons in this SaaS world, right? Because they love SaaS applications, right? I always joke that all these threat actors are teaching us that the new lateral movement is really lateral movement in your SaaS environment, right? Like, some examples is, we have seen these guys like looking at your Confluence pages and finding, credentials that maybe someone put there by mistake, or is, buying Slack, access tokens on the black market for certain companies, and then using that to access the Slack instance, search for things that were shared and maybe credentials, and social engineer IT teams through that access, right? So it opens the door to a lot of really interesting, attack vectors that we are not used to. Yeah.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And it just got my mind going in like three different directions. But one thing that comes to mind that I would imagine a lot of enterprise teams are not ready for is the concept of token theft, right? Because I think, every EDR out there, even Sysmon, will tell you when something's trying to dump creds from the local system, right? Because this is well understood. We know which API calls can do it. We also know which processes are going to be accessing or which registry hives. And so, any EDR tool off the shelf will tell you, hey, this looks like credential dumping. You should watch out for that. You know what probably very few, if any of them, are looking for is theft of an authentication token, a cookie, off of an endpoint, which your info stealers are doing, right? That's what they're doing. They're gathering those things up. You saw the same thing, but in a different way with the Okta breach, when they were pulling the HAR files out of the support portal. They were doing it so that they could extract out those session tokens, right? So that's a tricky thing, folks, because like I don't have to fish your users to get their credentials to Slack or to O365, right? I just have to find a way to steal the token. And, realistically, we're not really talking about, and Lennart's on the call, I don't think we're really as worried these days about, public Wi-Fi as we once were. I know people here will cringe. Now, Lennart probably has 3 or 4 different ideas of ways that Wi-Fi is still an attack vector. But I think the predominant attack surface there is malware on an endpoint that's able to gather those session cookies. That gives an attacker carte blanche access to SaaS applications long enough to do damage. And that's a really tricky thing to detect. I'm just being honest, right? Because it will look like that user MFA'd into your environment. The attacker, it will look like they MFA'd in because they didn't need to MFA. They used a token that had already been MFA'd. So it's the same thing as your user, your password, and your MFA. If I get that token, I've essentially done both factors of authentication, and it's really tricky. So I'm guessing like conditional access and things like that are really the only way to like start to clamp down on that, right?
It is, but the trick there is like not all vendors are really that sophisticated, right? So some examples, if the app is not behind SSO, you may not have any control over that. It may not even support SSO, and even if it supports SSO, that you may not have control over session timeouts and stuff like that. So there's a lot of tricky things there. Even recently we saw that threat actor, I think it was the one behind Redline, that found like that undocumented API in Google Chrome where you could actually still authenticate with a session token after that session had been invalidated, right? Something that Chrome used internally. So it's just like that attack surface is huge in terms of things that you can do. Another example that comes to mind, I think it was APT 2029 a while ago. This is probably like 2 years old, but there was like this interesting campaign where, these folks are pretty smart, right? They know that the minute they touch an endpoint, they're going to get caught, right? Because the organizations they are attacking, they have over-invested on endpoint, controls, right? They have CrowdStrike, they have even at the network level. So one of the exploits I was looking at, what they were doing was actually they will exploit a vulnerability. It will stay in the browser and it will steal the cookies from that were still in the browser, but it will not touch, there was no disk, there was nothing in this, there was no process, it was just within the shellcode itself will do it in memory in the browser and then exfiltrate the cookies and forget about everything else, right? So I think we're gonna see more and more on this where attackers know that touching an endpoint is super risky these days, right? It's very risky. It's very likely at some point at a scale someone is gonna cut you because there are amazing defenders out there that have incredible capabilities at the endpoint level, but there's still that no man's land where it's really hard to know what's going on, right? If you are not touching the endpoint.
Yeah, no doubt. And I remember one technique that came up a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember if this was documented happening in the wild or it was just a proof of concept, but it's the browser in the middle concept. So, yes, there are phishing resistant, authentication mechanisms and things like that. But if you can get a user to go to a browser that's controlled by an adversary, and I've seen them do this in a POC that involved basically no VNC serving up a full screen website through a web browser. So you're basically using a VNC session on another computer in a web browser, but it looks like you're just on the website. So when you put in credentials, they're being logged on that endpoint. And when you put in the multi-factor, it's being captured. So the session exists on that other system. You logged in, but the session exists somewhere else. And so like, there's so many new attack paths here that are going to be really, really tricky for orgs to kind of get visibility and detections around. Yeah. Well, Jaime, where can folks find you, man, if they want to chat with you more about this?
Yeah, Twitter, Jaime Blasco B, my company, Nudge Security, we put a lot of resources out there that talk about these topics, and, you can find for that. But yeah, it's still somehow involved in Twitter, not as much as before, but still try to have conversations there. Yeah.
Awesome. I dropped a couple of links there in the Slack or in the Zoom chat. And folks, like we mentioned every week, be sure to jump in and join us in our Lima Charlie Slack. Keep the conversation going week after week. That's also where we announce a weekly winner of a Defender Fridays themed kind of t-shirt that we ship out to one lucky person that joins us each week. Jaime, it was freaking awesome having you on the show this week. Any last questions or thoughts from anybody in the audience? I think everybody's scared now because SaaS is the monster under the bed that we just pretend isn't there, right? Like maybe if we don't look, it won't get us.
Man, I could share some crazy stories about that where we done POCs and then people are like, nope, I don't want to do this because this just I don't want my boss to know about this. It's like okay,
it is eye-opening. So I'm going to make sure, I don't know if we dropped this link yet, but yeah, for anybody that doesn't have it, here's the link to our Slack. Jump in there. We'll drop some links and stuff after the show. Next week, folks, we've got Ryan Chapman, who's actually almost always on, but I don't see him on this week. But yeah, he usually tunes in with us. Ryan's got a really awesome background in ransomware and IR. He's done some really awesome things. And so he's going to be on next week to talk about that kind of stuff. So have a fantastic rest of your Friday, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Jaime. It was a pleasure chatting with you. And we'll see you all same time, same place next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.